Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Thursday, January 30th, 2025. We are continuing with a few different items today, including the Budget Adjustment Act. But before we get into the BAA, given what happened in Washington on Tuesday with the federal government freezing various federal funds and Medicaid portals and then opening them, and things are in court, and it all affects us. So Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office has put together an overview of federal funds in the budget. So this is for us to get a better understanding of what could be affected given the uncertainty of our current times. So thanks, Emily, and we'll let you have at it here. Everybody should have a copy of this on their desk.
Yes, I will. Erin, can you send me the?
I just sent it to you.
Oh, perfect. So for the record, Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office. As Representative Shai mentioned, I put a presentation. I got a request before what happened earlier this week from the Treasurer's Office. They have their sort of federal funds working group and asked JFO to come in and speak about just federal funds in the budget generally. Where do they go? Who gets them? And so I put a presentation together. I gave it to that group yesterday. Representative Shai asked that I come present it here. I'll be giving it to JFC tomorrow. So those of you that are on both committees get to hear it twice. But the before I share the PowerPoint, the sort of it's very much a general overview, you know, taking sort of total budget numbers and looking where the funds are going, right? I've worked in the executive branch for a couple of departments. So some federal funds I know a little bit more than others, but there are hundreds of federal grants running through state government, and I'm not an expert on any of them. So to the extent this sort of gives you that high level picture of who's getting federal funds, you know, you sort of keep in the back of your head for your agencies and departments that you are working on budgets with, can help sort of inform some conversations that we will likely have over the next couple of weeks as you build the 26 budget, just about, and as things change in Washington, just sort of what the implications are and where funds are rolling and what programs are supported and staff, et cetera. So that's my frame, if you will. This really quick, and it's a pretty quick presentation. There we go. All right. So at the highest level, and you've probably seen some of these slides before in the all-member briefing, new member orientation, et cetera. But so at the highest, and this is all based on the FY 2025 budget, right? We've only had the 26 budget for 24 hours and that's not yet run all the numbers yet.
Is this the 2025 has passed?
Yes, 25 has passed. So not the budget adjustment.
There's a lot of federal money that we're putting in the budget adjustment.
Yeah.
For example. And so before you even get any further, Emily, how do we compare with other states in terms of how much federal funds we receive?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head.
I am aware that, if I understand it correctly, we are a receiving state, so we get more in federal funds than we send.
Yes, that I do know,
Right.
Is true, that we have, in terms of the amount of income tax or federal taxes that are paid by Vermonters, we get more back than we could from the federal government. So the federal funds make up over a third of the appropriations that are made by the General Assembly. Right when we talked about sort of spending authority and the role of the General Assembly in the appropriations process, right? The General Assembly has to give the executive branch the authority to spend those federal dollars, right? We'll talk a little bit more about JFC in a minute, but that's why you see federal funds in the budget, as you were saying, like, yes, go execute that program on behalf of the federal government. And it's important to remember, right, federal funds are supporting everything from direct grants to nonprofits or towns or other entities out in the school districts, out in the world that are running. And this is just money that runs through state government. right? So a lot of grants sort of stop at state government, are managed by state government, reporting is done by state government. The execution of grants and contracts, et cetera, is done by state government with all of these other entities. This does not speak to or include anything related to money that goes directly to other entities. So there's money that goes directly to the University of Vermont. There's money that goes directly to towns or other entities. And that if it doesn't pass through state government, then the General Assembly doesn't appropriate it. And it's not part of the budget. So this doesn't touch on any of those.
Right. And so we don't really know what cities and towns have in the way of federal funds. Our town clerks would know, or town treasurers, but or select boards.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I talked about, right, a lot of the federal money is sort of going out in grants and contracts. There's also Medicaid payments that are going out to healthcare providers and other human services providers. And then the other sort of component of federal funds to keep in mind is the support of state government. So there are, to the extent the states are operating federal programs on behalf of the federal government, there are staff within state government, lots of positions that are funded with federal dollars. And the
Department of Labor is an example.
Department of Labor is a great example, a lot of department, and there are lots of positions in state government that are partially funded with federal dollars, right? They're working on some programs that are more federally funded and some that are state funded, and they, you deploy people efficiently and you have to tap different funding streams based on the work that you're doing at that time. And similarly, when we talk about the internal service funds and those sorts of things, right, the federal government recognizes that there are overhead costs for government to exist. And the sort of through the internal service fund process and the allocation of those overhead expenses to agencies and departments, the federal funds pick up some of those costs. They're sort of fair share, if you will, of having a Department of Human Resources, having an accounting system, having buildings and general services, those sorts of core functions that you need to just run an organization. So those are important things to remember about federal funds. This is a chart that we use pretty much in every big presentation we've been doing about the state budget generally, right? This breaks down state versus federal funds. The green bar by the sort of major sections in the budget. We did break out human services, Medicaid, and corrections separately because those are big buckets within themselves, but those are all in one section of the budget. But this is the sort of demonstration of sort of where the state funds are going versus where federal funds are going, right? You can see Medicaid has a fairly large share of federal funds through that federal match. Medicaid, in and of itself is a federal program that the state is operating on behalf of the federal government. And the other area that you see a lot of federal funds is in the Agency of Transportation. And then as you know, it's important to see not just sort of the size of the bar, but the bar as a share of the total spending of a department. And where there is in federal funds is also an important thing to look at. So we also, just pulled it together at a high level in terms of, from the numbers perspective, or, show it differently. Some people digest information via picture, some via spreadsheet. This is, breaking down those same categories, total spending in those sections of government, the amount of federal funds in that section, and then what percentage of that total spending is made up of federal funds.
So in any given year, we're talking about $3.1 billion of federal funds coming to this state. Yes.
And just running through state government.
Right. Much more across state.
The question on the higher education shows 0%, correct?
Yes.
And I'm thinking of VSAC. Isn't VSAC a combination of federal and state funding?
Yes, and that comes to the General Assembly doesn't have to authorize the federal funds to VSAC. It goes directly to VSAC, not through state government.
I see.
Yeah. Same with UVM's money or the state colleges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So right, if you look, it's sort of high level, and I have some more slides that kind of dive into the more details in terms of the individual departments that are underlying each of these sections in the Appropriations Act. But Medicaid is over 60% federally funded. in the commerce section, commerce and community development is over 60%. Transportation is close to 60%. Natural resources is almost over 50%. Department of Labor is over 60%. So are there a lot of sort of core functions of state government that we think about that have a significant amount of federal funds?
Well, and I know it's not a lot of human services is only 38%, but I'm surprised that there's 253 million. What would be federal funds in human services?
So for any human services, that's mostly Department of Children and Families. So that's like the LIHEAP program, TANF, SNAP.
Okay.
CFAP. Yeah.
Children.
Okay. Question, yes.
Yeah, John had a question.
Oh, John, okay.
So aside from Medicaid, or what other ones have match?
That's a great question. The big ones I know off the top of my head are Medicaid and transportation, but we'll talk about federal match in a minute.
Okay, great.
Um,
Yeah, so on the human services, I mean, SNAP is 100% federally funded, I believe. Any idea how much of that 253 is SNAP?
Not off the top of my head, but we can
I'm just curious. I
get to it.
would assume it's a big chunk of it, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
Looks like Representative Dickinson has her hand up.
Oh, Representative Dickinson, thank you. It's hard to see that little hand up in the corner. Please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at this and I was a little bit surprised that DEVA had only 13%. But because I thought, and then Dale only has 6%, I thought that would be higher. But I'm looking at, I'm sort of wondering, Emily, if the global commitment, which is at 63%, is really is that the bulk of that Medicaid that?
Yes.
And all
And
the
we'll,
places?
We haven't gotten there yet, Lynn.
yeah, when I get to the human services slides, we can talk about that. Absolutely. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I will go to, so at a high level, the next slide, I know I had mentioned matching requirements. So a lot of times the federal government has matching requirements for federal funds. Thinking about it as sort of having skin in the game, if you will. We will give you money, but you gotta, help with the program. And so Medicaid is the one that has that has a lot of state match in the budget and it's a big chunk of spending. And a lot of the federal funds that come through are for Medicaid. Federal programs have different match rates depending on the programs themselves, and I don't know them off the top of my head. There's also sort of complications around match rates because the FMAP, for example, the federal Medicaid assistance percentage that we get on Medicaid changes every year, and it changes on the federal fiscal year. So when we're budgeting for things like Medicaid and global commitment, we not only have to think about what is the projected rate going to be in the next fiscal year, but then also translating that to okay, so for the first 3 months of the fiscal year, when it's a different federal fiscal year, it's one rate. And then for the remaining 9 months, it's a different match rate because it's a different federal fiscal year. So there's sort of all of that is going on underneath.
So when do you learn what the federal rate will be, the October 1st federal rate will be? Do we learn it in time for doing the budget?
We get an estimate in the spring, I believe, and then it's finalized sort of later.
Okay, and it's usually pretty close, we hope.
It's usually the thing that's tricky with Medicaid, right, is because we're talking about billions of dollars.
Right.
0.01% change actually has a noticeable impact on the.
Right. So when we do our FY26 budget, sometime this spring, we'll have a sense of the estimate, if all goes as it should go. And then that might not be, we have the budget, but it might be, the Senate has the budget.
I have to remember the timing of when we get the final one, but I think we get the final new rates after the budget is passed.
Right, but you get an estimate.
Yes, that estimate is in, right. I think we have the estimate,
You already have the estimate?
we have it. I can find out. We can check with AHS. And then, there's sort of and within Medicaid itself, there's multiple matching rates depending on the population. There was a lot of conversation around the, why can't I'm drawing a blank on the name of the act that did Medicaid expansion, the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act, said if you are they're called the new adult population, you get a different match rate than sort of traditional Medicaid. The Children's Health Insurance Program has a different match rate than traditional Medicaid. So there's within federal programs, there can be different match rates. Other matching requirements that, the transportation match rate. This is another one where like Chris is here. I believe it's 5 to 1, 4 to 1.
It's typically 80-20.
80-20.
With exceptions.
Of course.
It's always an exception.
So there's, lots that has to go into figuring out to make sure that we have enough state funds to draw down federal funds when we build the budget. There's also often maintenance of effort requirements. So there is in order to continue to receive the federal funds, you have to keep providing the same level of service that you've provided previously, or the federal government says, we won't participate, or sometimes there's penalties so if you don't maintain the effort. And it depends on the program. Again, not every program has maintenance of effort. The rules around maintenance of effort are different depending on every program and grant. So, but that is a sort of underlying thing in terms of making sure that you are maintaining that level of effort so that you can continue to draw down the funds. Oftentimes, sort of when you're managing federal funds and looking at how they're being spent, this idea of supplement versus supplant comes up, meaning that federal funds are generally, in most cases, a lot of cases are meant to supplement work already being done at the state level or at a school district level. They're not meant to be in lieu of the investments that states or local governments are making. So there's often sort of requirements to go back with the feds and make sure that you're sort of continuing to provide the level that you said you were providing prior to the federal funds coming in. And then the federal funds are sort of supplementing what's already being done, not supplanting, not sort of in lieu of state funds. And this one I just put in for those who are on Joint Fiscal Committee, right? Any new federal funds that come into the state, any new federal grants that are awarded either through a competitive process or if they were to set up a new formula grant program, the Joint Fiscal Committee or the General Assembly reviews those grants that come in and approves or disapproves the acceptance by the executive branch. And through that process gives the authority to the executive branch to spend the funds under that grant. So then the next bunch of slides that I have are breaking down those sections of government into the individual agencies and departments that are within those sections. So I started with protection. I'll show general government at the end because there's only one area of general government that receives federal funds. But the highlights here, the military, right? The National Guard is mostly federally funded. Center for Crime Victim Services receives more than 50% of its funds from the federal government. The Department of Public Safety, right? We have both emergency management and Homeland Security and sort of other public safety related funds that run through the state. I don't know if I don't have any more specifics on
The
this.
Secretary of State's office,
Probably elections related funding.
elections related things, yeah. And then USDA would be the Agency of Agriculture. Tom, do you have a question? Okay.
We get to the Agency of Human Services and Medicaid. Speak to Representative Dickinson's question from earlier. The answer is the reason why DEVA and mental health and Dale have such small federal line items is because most of their federal funds are in that global commitment match line item, right? So that's through that sort of double appropriation. The federal funds themselves go into that B301 appropriation, the mixing bowl, and then it comes back out. So this doesn't show specifically that breakdown between which departments are receiving global commitment match. That's in the budget, but this is sort of where the federal funds are going, but most of it is right, that global commitment match.
So these ones that are out, like DCF is almost 197 million. That's exclusive of what's going into global commitment. It's a separate.
It's separate,
They
right?
have some in global commitment, and then this is all the rest that's not in global commitment.
So yeah, that's TANF, SNAP,
Yeah, okay.
DFAP, LIHEAP, other programs, you know, and this one is one, you know, on the sort of flip side, I think, a lot of times when there are harder state financial times, right? Then you're looking at it from the other perspective in terms of who has more general fund or who has more state funds, right? This sort of shows that picture where places like the Department of Corrections, which they receive a very small amount of federal funds, but are mostly state funds. You know, that's the sort of piece that's not shown here, but that's the other side of this coin, is sort of like what's being supported by state dollars versus federal dollars.
Actually, so surprised at the veterans.
Yeah.
So in
Maybe they
the,
show up somewhere else.
the veterans home is sort of a mix because they have both. So there's Medicare payments and VA payments, depending, and that all depends on sort of their case mix in terms of what the insurance of their population has. But they also like get Medicaid. So right, that's a little funky in terms of how it runs through global commitment and whatnot. But it depends for them.
Yeah, just quickly, going back to the prior chart, public safety, perhaps I should know the answer to that, but is that high percentage in large part because of FEMA funds that go through public safety?
So the FEMA funds, that's a good question for public safety. It's Homeland Security money. Some of it is FEMA money, and the FEMA money, in the terms of the budget and how it gets appropriated, sometimes is in the budget itself.
A lot of it goes through emergency management.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know if that, obviously there could be wide variations in that percentage year to year.
Yeah. And sometimes FEMA money is like through the excess receipts process because it's one time in nature as opposed to sort of base ongoing operations of a department.
Questioning about a percentage, what stands out to me is that the Dale federal funding is only represents 6%.
That's the global commitment thing. Most of Dale is Medicaid, right? Both long-term care and disability services. Medicaid. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, keep going, reduce.
So the next two, we've got both natural resources and commerce and community development. You know, in this one, I think the Department of Environmental Conservation, right, is over 60% federally funded in the FY 2025 budget, right? That's money from, you know, clean water, clean air, other environmental protection agency related things. I'm not as up to speed on the Agency of Commerce and Community Development federal funds, but there is a, you know, fair amount of money from HUD, I know that runs through housing and community development, and other funds that run through VHCB. And then like CBDG grant runs through commerce and community development. CBDG.
Jump in real quick, just to add, that's about $4 million a year from HUD.
For what?
It goes through ACCD.
Oh, okay.
Projects, community projects.
Jim?
Yeah, so my question's on VHCB, 69%. So if we, you know, for example, have the ability with one-time funds to, you know, appropriate $10 million, if that in addition draw down extra federal funds, or am I?
That is a great question. I think for them, it probably depends on the project, right?
You're talking about,
You should ask.
on housing and you're not talking about VHCB, you're talking about Department.
Yeah, I get my acronyms mixed up.
Yeah, VHCB, when we give them money, that usually, as far as I understand it, right, they can draw down more federal funds. They use that, yeah.
Definitely, but this really surprised me, this figure, and maybe I can look at last year's budget that they gave us so that I understand what federal monies they can regularly count on, but this is money drawn down to support the different projects that they have, yes.
So when we give money to VHCB, perhaps one side of the conversation that we don't have is the conservation side, where the money that goes into the trust fund, that goes into the Vermont Health Conservation Trust Fund, 40% of that is used for conservation projects, 60% of that could be used for housing. Conservation matches tend to be closer to 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, rather than in housing where it's now about 5 or 6-to-1. And that's not drawing down. The conservation side is drawing down mostly federal funds to help with our conservation efforts. It still doesn't account for the 60 some odd percent.
Yeah.
The housing matches that happen are a mixed bag relating from HUD monies to, for any particular project, to, what gets invested through the Community Reinvestment Act and financial institutions primarily, but that doesn't account for, that may not account at all for what a federal match might be.
I mean, it's a high percent, 70%, I'm just trying to overall.
Yeah. Well, these are places that could be harmed. And then did you, the Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, is that from the EPA? Is it
A lot of it, yeah.
a lot of different things for that, John?
Just a quick question. So as these departments bring our budgets here to us, are they going to have detailed out, where the federal money's going versus what they want from the state to
They should, yeah.
fill the gap or fund something completely differently?
When we get the ups and downs, we'll
Right.
start to be looking at those kinds of things. And I think we have a new lens to add to that look.
Yes. And I think yeah, typically in their budget presentations, there'll be detail on it, but you should ask them.
The same question that you have on the tourism and marketing side, the same percentage, roughly the same percentage of federal
Yeah.
funds, like what does the federal
That was-
government care about our tourism and marketing?
Right, that surprises me, that one.
But my memory serves me, there was kind of like a one-time grant to states for tourism after the pandemic, and it was over a couple of years, so I think that's temporary, but I.
Good question to ask, but we answer.
That'd be part of my.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. We
You
have
see what I did there? Sort of my tours.
tour. Yeah, well, there's a lot of places to tour in tourism, yes.
So there's a couple other questions. One is, how much federal money? So obviously, if you have more state dollars to draw down federal money, if that money is available, you can draw it down. Question is, how much federal money exists in some of those, for some of those purposes? And the other question would be, of the money that we take, how much do we ever have to revert? Because we don't pass it through as grant, or for whatever reason, we don't use it in the timeframe which the money is, has to be spent.
Which is true for all the federal funds you're
For all
talking
federal
about. Do we ever return federal funds,
Sometimes.
like in these areas that we're talking
I think
about?
s- I
Do we
think
have
we
any
do.
sense of that? That's a good question. I never thought about that. I thought
I don't
about, we
know.
leave a lot of money on the table that we could be getting in the first place in terms of federal funds. But do we ever return?
Some has to, I think I've seen the experience where some has been returned. So, it's just something to keep aware of, that when you say, well, we got more money, we get more federal funds. Well, not if the federal pot, it doesn't have its still money in there. And then by the same token, if we get the money and don't use it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, but.
I have nothing to add to that. Line of questioning, I did want to say that isn't it possible that there's ARPA money in that, VHCD, or no?
There shouldn't be, no. The ARPA was all in its own one time. This is just the sort of base appropriations
Okay.
for agencies and departments. That doesn't mean that there aren't the right federal.
Yeah.
There are some federal programs, right, that have been around for a long time and are reauthorized every 5 years, or hopefully reauthorized every 5 years, and they sort of go along, and those are like in the base. There are also competitive grants that will get issued for whatever length of time. Could be, I have no idea.
1 to 3 years kind of thing,
Yeah.
I think.
And those will, will show up in the budgets and then come back out as they spend them. I think it's important that with federal funds, right, you have to incur an allowable expense in order to draw down those federal funds. And have the match available. So there may be, you have this much, authority under that federal grant to spend, but you have to incur the expense, have the match, sort of meet all the requirements in order to draw down that federal funds. And we may not have enough match, for example, or, we may not have had the expenses. People didn't show up for Medicaid. you know, or more people showed up than we thought, and then we need the match for that. So there's all of that sort of going.
So actually, that would be a good question to ask as the agencies and commissions come in about whether it goes back, because then we'll find out.
And then follow up, I mean, we get periodic, being in Fish and Wildlife, both in Vermont and Pennsylvania, I experienced a number of federal audits where they come in and audit. And they come in and audit to make sure that you spent the money on
Right.
what you were supposed to spend.
Right.
If you didn't, they make you pay
Right.
back.
And then I think we usually have, I know we did with ARPA, we had a certain percentage we left, and when we do grants for clawback in case there's a problem. That's the risk. And Rep. Dickinson has a question. Lynn?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm just curious, Emily, if you know if the VHCB high percentage is from the, they get tax-free federal credits for low-income housing. And that's one of the things that we leverage for, is that's where the big money really comes in to do their projects. Is that the federal money that they're counting toward that high percentage? Or do you know?
I'm not sure. I think that's a VHCB question in terms of like all the other agencies and departments, what that federal spending authority is that's being authorized in the big bill.
I have sent
What it reflects.
to the folks at VHCB to help us understand this.
Well, they talked last year about syndicates that they put together. People buy like $1 million tax credit. I mean, banks and just
Yeah.
companies, private equity, I don't know. The point of it is that there are people who buy these federal tax credits,
Right.
basically are part of what they get, I suspect. But I don't know.
And I don't think that's what this funding represents. I think that operates outside of the appropriations process. But did you have?
If you look at last year's budget testimony from the HCB on the JFL website, it gives you an entire breakdown.
Beautiful.
$56.68 million.
Okay.
Oh, could you send that to Erin so we could have that, please? Just.
Actually, if the committee looks at all of the budget packets from each department on the JFL website, it gives you a lot of detail about like what are the CFDA numbers for any funding source.
Yeah, okay, and Tom?
The low income housing tax credits is actually a program that's run through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, not VHCB. It's used to attract investment, but they're more, that comes through the bank, through VHFA.
Okay.
Good. Let's continue.
This last one, these are sort of the ones that don't have sub-departments, if you will, to break down. So I just lumped them all together or put them all on one slide. In general government, the only area that receives federal funds directly, right? Some of them get federal funds through the internal service fund process. But the only one who gets them directly is the Department of Libraries, and it's almost 40% of their budget is federally funded. The Department of Labor, a lot of that is the unemployment insurance program, is over 60%. I did do a little bit of a math tweak on the Agency of Education. Right, if you look at the total spending on education in the state, it's over $2 billion, right? But most of that money is moving to the school districts, right? So in terms of looking at the part of state government that is the Agency of Education, and the grants that they run and the federal grant that are exclusive of the education fund piece, the agency is about 90% federally funded.
That's the categorical aid, like special education.
Yeah, the IDEA grant, Title I, Title II, the other titles. I
Okay,
can't remember how many there are.
right.
It's been a while since I worked there. And other federal funds that they manage.
Right.
After school money, there's lots of.
Right, when, at some point, I think it would be beneficial for this committee to go over the education fund outlook page. And I guess we get Julia in to talk about that. And then you can see what we're talking about with all these things. It's.
Yeah. And the education fund outlook doesn't show the federal funds or the operation of the agency, right? That's going to be in the
Right.
agency testimony.
But it does show special ed and things like that, and that's.
It shows the state contribution to special education.
Doesn't show the
not
entire
the federal.
Okay, so we can have her talk about both of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's just an important piece that the agency is executing a lot of federal programs on behalf of the state. And then we talked a lot about the Agency of Transportation, but their budget, including the Department of Motor Vehicles, is over 2/3 federally funded.
John, you had a question.
Yeah, just an acronym question,
Yeah.
STRS.
Oh, VSTRS, the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System.
Thanks.
I also excluded that because that doesn't, if you're trying to compare.
And then we have VSTRS without the T, which is the state employees,
Close.
everything, yeah.
Yes.
They all move fast. Okay.
And so the last slide, you may recall from all member briefing, Marcia Howard came to speak about federal funds and sort of what was anticipated to happen in Washington. The FFIS, federal funds information for the states, is a really great resource for state policymakers, staff, et cetera. They provide a lot of good information on what's happening in Washington. They have really interesting issue briefs that do a lot of state by state comparisons in terms of who's getting how much money, how does it compare per capita to other states on specific funding stream basis. They do a really nice overview of the FMAP, and as the estimates come out, what does it mean and how does it get calculated and how do states compare and who's going up and who's going down and all that kind of information. And as things change, there's a lot of IIJA information out there. There's just a lot of good information that they put out. So if you
want to get
to do more
emails,
reading,
you can send them an email and say, I'm a legislator, put me on your list, and they're fine with that. Yeah. So I guess in addition, just to let you know, the administration is well aware of all this, obviously, and they're thinking about, they're starting to think about from agencies, like what happens if, and we also asked them to take a look at stress testing our reserves and just really taking a look. And I'm not sure exactly what the group that the treasurer has put together, what, are they just sort of keeping an eye on things? What are they thinking about?
that's a good question for the treasurer. I'm not sure. I presented this and then
You left.
I came here, I believe, after that.
Well, I guess at least we can say that the point is that a lot of people across the state are thinking about this and trying, there's just so much uncertainty, but at least we have a sense of what the dollars are. And, therefore what it could mean. I guess when we learned that we were going to close down for COVID in March of 2020, we had the legislature had like 48 hours, right? Every committee had to think about what we needed to do and what we needed to put in place before we left for 2 or 3 weeks. Because then we'd be back. But what we need, so we passed bills around telehealth. I can't remember all the bills that we passed. That's just the first one that comes to mind. But
UI.
Right, UI, unemployment, we ended up having legislators come in and help with UI because they were so overwhelmed when you go to from 3,000 to 80,000 claims in a week, it's overwhelming to say the least. So this government has had experience in sudden changes. That was a different magnitude that this could be, and we just have no idea, right? We might not get a lot of warning, so at least we have this information. This is really helpful, Emily, just to sort of understand the universe of what could be affected by decisions made in Washington. Any other questions or thoughts about this at this point? Thank you very much, Emily, appreciate it.
You want me to stay up here? I can just go over there to stay here.
You can stay there. Okay, great. Are we going to talk about the spreadsheet again? Or do people have some things that we can close yet? Jim, I keep looking at you because I know they're in your box talking about things.
And I'm waiting for a message back. But there is one other piece I did get. Some information on. It was in the area of DCF, but it was one time spreadsheet, and it had something to do with mainframe, so everybody assumed ADF. So it was
It was at the bottom of page 7, miscellaneous, transition
Yeah.
planning for the Office of
Yeah.
Child Support.
Yes, it's $1 million, but only 340,000 of it is state funds, the rest are federal funds, and I gotta pose that question to ADF, got a message back. This is the state's, the 340,000 state's contribution to a feasibility study on the overall software update for their Office of Child Support Systems, which is required by the federal government. It was just explained maybe why the federal government is paying 70% and 66% of that charge. So I am fine with checking that off unless people need more information, but this, it sounds like it's something the federal government says we gotta do, and they're paying for most of
Right.
it. So it's for the planning of that change.
Right. Okay, well, it sounds like, and I think it's an ancient system too.
Yes,
Oh, yeah,
Right,
no,
is that right,
it's been an
Dave? Yeah.
ongoing
1981.
concern for some.
1981,
When it
that
was,
system,
yeah.
DOS. That's the DOS one.
correct.
Everybody remember DOS? Remember VHS, VH tapes or whatever?
I'm
those
dating
were called?
myself, but I took a course in Fortran once.
Did you really?
Yeah, yeah. Most people probably don't even know what Fortran is, and I don't remember what it is. I took one class. Enough to convince me I didn't want to be a computer programmer.
My calculus class, it was, you go down into the basement, type on this giant machine,
Oh, yeah.
each card, one line, Y
Yeah.
equals MX plus B.
It was a very, I mean,
Come back
programming back
tomorrow.
then was very laborious because you had it was all punch cards and then they.
Right.
You get a whole big printout and it's an error, line 3.
It's wonderful that people kept up with it because
Yeah.
they made it better because it was so terrible.
Yeah.
But I think if Chris and I don't really know what a mainframe is, and it probably means it's stupid.
Another conversation.
It's the old IBM, where the cold rooms where they had to store the computers. Remember how big those, I mean, I never went in one, but the pictures of them were unbelievable.
Yeah.
So,
Just watch the movie Hidden Figures, which
Yeah.
is about,
oh,
you know,
yeah.
space program, and know that your phone is 10 times more powerful than that room of computers.
Right, yeah.
But they were
Right.
more, there were less problems.
Yes. Okay, so that.
No cybersecurity issues with the main.
Emily, was this one that we just did, the 1100 E4, who's that, DCF? Transition planning, we left that open and now we can close that, it's line 64 on this chart. Okay, do we have the language yet for the substance? I'm just going up from the
No,
1100,
and,
we're waiting on that.
yeah,
Okay. And we're getting rid of and that's part of the 60, line 62, the 4 million, which is going to the 10 million. So that is the language. So line 62 is going to go away. See what else is open. I'm going from the bottom up. Okay,
Remember under P205, which was so,
oh, yes.
there was a question. 800.
Yeah.
The back left.
Okay,
So the line that's on this spreadsheet here, which is 0.19. so-
went up?
This one went up,
Okay, okay, good, all right.
right? It's 237,270. That's a collection of those miscellaneous ones that are in.
Okay,
405. And then the AES number went down from 405 to 168.5.
ooh, so that's down below.
That's a net
Yeah.
collection of
Okay.
AES.
So tell me the numbers again, Trevor, it was at
It's on the sheet here for 405.
405, yeah, okay.
And it's now 168,500.
Do you round up when it's 500, Emily?
In the background, it'll be the,
Yeah, okay.
to the dollar.
Yeah, so 405 to 160, so we're saving,
About 191,000
Yeah.
between the two.
great. I bet they're relieved. We'll update that. Okay,
Yes, and
yeah,
they could have gotten more money.
yeah, okay, well. And what was the reason for the increase from 0.19 to 0.237?
That was they miscalculated the mental health evaluation costs. The original estimate was 34,730,
Okay,
and it went to 80,000. So the number is 237,270 for the items that are in line 15.
okay,
This spread.
okay. Okay, everybody
So
clear on that?
we're gonna check out 305.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're done with the. Cool.
205,
205.
yeah, so that's good.
I understand GovOps is finishing it now. Maybe they could sense it.
Oh, that would be great. Okay, so that would be the public safety.
208.
Okay. Okay.
We closed line number 33 to 317 yesterday on the transportation. There's
I have it checked off.
still a little note there.
Yes, but no, we haven't gotten an updated spreadsheet. We haven't updated the spreadsheet, so that's,
Okay.
so I've checked it off with my pen. The rest
Write
we
it down.
talked about transporting children, foster care, medical appointments. You talked about that yesterday.
Yes. Yep.
And we agreed to that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Me
think
too.
that's everything that we can talk about on that page for now. And then we're waiting, so maybe we should break for a few minutes. I think it's all about to begin. And then they can come in, we can hear from GovOps on those last ones that we hear. So,